Hey everyone, welcome to the latest stream of React 2025. In today's stream, we're going to be adding comments to my personal site. Now for those of you who are tuning in, who are new, maybe from my Twitter, I'm going to give a quick overview of the course and the product to get you up to speed before we jump into this live stream. Let's jump over to a quick outline. Going to give that overview, give a little demo, and then start to talk through specifically the product that we're working with, Fast Feedback, and how we're going to build this page that will show comments on my personal site. This uses a couple interesting things like iframes, catch-all routes, and finally at the end we're going to start doing some coding for editing and deleting sites, part of the full life cycle of managing that site inside of the Fast Feedback product. So first things first, if you're joining in new, what is the course? This course, React 2025, is a kind of a new take on how to build and deploy modern applications with the Jamstack. And I think I knew what I found was that building these modern web applications can be difficult. And when I stumbled onto Next.js and the Jamstack, it really simplified a lot of things for me, especially deploying with Vercel and using products like Firebase, Firestore, and Stripe, which are all the things that I'm using in this course, really simplified that stack and made my life a lot easier. So this course takes you from zero to production for a real application, this Fast Feedback product that we build in the course, and it's through a series of live streams where I show how I build everything. So if you want to learn more, you can check out the course at react2025.com. And the product that we're building, Fast Feedback, is the easiest way to add comments or reviews to your static site. So this is what we've been slowly iterating and working on throughout the course. And today's stream is really fun because we actually get to see it being used on my personal site to add comments to blog posts. So if you see an example here, this is comments for Fast Feedback itself. And if I were to go sign in with Google, it uses social authentication to prevent any spam. And I go into my dashboard, I have a listing of all these sites that I want to manage feedback for, and I can even see feedback that people have left on the sites and toggle whether they're visible or not visible. So today what we're going to be doing is looking at how to add comments directly to my site. I'm going to start with a little demo. So here's my site running locally. I have a blog post up that is just a fake blog post I added for this, but you'll notice down at the bottom I have this widget down here for comments. I have the ability to leave a comment and then a list of all the comments that have been left for this article. Now, something that's really interesting with this approach is that I'm using iframes. Now, why am I using iframes? The interesting thing here is that it is framework agnostic. It doesn't matter if I'm using React or Vue or Angular. Regardless of what I'm using, I can add this to my site, and with a little bit of JavaScript, if I want, I can even make it automatically resize. So let me give a demo of what that looks like. If I'm not using the auto resizing, I'm just using a vanilla iframe tag, and this is wrapped with Chakra UI, which is a CSS and JS, as well as a component library that I'm using. But we could just write this like this if we wanted to. So an iframe HTML tag, and the source is pointing to my local host on a different port, this embed route for this Fast Feedback product, and then the site. So if I render this, this is where it gets interesting because you'll notice that the iframe doesn't resize. So depending on how you want to display this on your site, you have the control of figuring out exactly how you want to do this. So if I inspect here, as you saw before, there were 2 comments, right? But you only see 1. And the reason for this is if we look at this iframe and we go up to the top of the iframe, you see that it has a height of 150. And I can manually set this to be 400 or whatever, and you'll see that now the comments show up. And the reason for this is that the iframe doesn't dynamically resize when we land on this page. So it really depends on how you'd want to show these on your site, and we're giving the client, the consumer of this, the ability to handle that in multiple ways. So maybe you want them to scroll, maybe you only want to show the first one, and then they click a button and it shows the rest. It's up to the client for how they want to do it, and that's one of the nice things about making it as simple as just adding an iframe. But what's really neat is this iframe resizer library that I've used quite a bit. It's really awesome. I'd highly recommend you check it out. But really all we have to do is, instead of doing a vanilla iframe, this is in React. So they have an iframe resizer React, and we just use this instead. And what it does under the hood is it goes ahead and takes care of dynamically resizing that iframe. So you'll notice that the iframe gets dropped in here, these comments load, and it automatically resizes depending on, there could be 10 comments on here, 20 comments on here, and it handles all of that for you. I think that's really neat that you can allow the client or the consumer of this to figure out how they want to display that. So that's kind of the demo of what this looks like. I want to talk through some of the code changes that were necessary to make this work. The first being catch-all routes. So in the previous streams, we had talked about dynamic routes with Next.js using this bracket syntax. And there's another form of that we can use, which uses the ... and that is a catch-all route. So if you notice over here, this route was /embed / some site ID and then / some slug. And this slug is whatever I have up here in the URL for the ID marking this blog post. Now the interesting thing here is if I open this up in a new tab, which is where you would actually go leave the comment, you'll see it is site /ID /feedback, which is that slug. Now, the way we've talked about dynamic routing so far, it's only accounted for this first dynamic field, which is the site ID. If we want multiple, so like /feedback, then we need to use a catch-all route. Now, you might have seen this before if you've had to work with any sort of CMS, but what we're able to do with this is looking at our embedded page, which I can manually go here to show you what this looks like, if I can spell it right. So this is what the iframe is actually putting inside of my site. You see that there's no width sizing because we're leaving that up to the client. So this page, the site ID and feedback from the URL, we're able to pull that into a variable called site. And this site variable is defined by the name of our file. And we're able to do, X number of dynamic variables that we want here. So the first one is going to be the site ID. The second one is going to be the route. Now because of that, now that we have access to our route, we can modify our get feedback function that talks to Firebase and change our ref to say, if we provide a route, we also want to filter this information where the route matches. So what this looks like is if I'm on this blog post, I'm only seeing the comments for this blog. But if I went back and I chose some other post, and I scroll all the way down, we'll wait for that page to render because it's got the development server running locally, and you'll see that there's no comments for this specific blog post. So it reads that Gumroad node API route, and it knows which pieces of feedback to show. What is my VS Code theme? My VS Code theme is Sorcerer. Where is it at here? Yeah, Sorcerer. Really like it. It's got some good contrast, which I like. So if I go back to this feedback page and we scroll down and we go to the other page, the site page, which is this one. This is where a user would go to actually leave a comment on the site. Inside of here, we give it that same treatment of a catch-all route. So you'll see that in our breadcrumb, it now goes from all the sites to specifically my site, and then whichever slug or URL that I want to say for a blog post. And to come full circle with how we want to save and manage these routes, right here, we do the exact same treatment of pulling off the site ID and the route from that query. And then when we're actually saving the piece of feedback, I just added this new piece right here so that we can save off that route, either some route that we specify like /feedback, or just use the index page. So what that looks like in our Firestore database then is these new pieces of feedback that come in have a route attached. And if I go back to I think that was just stale data. Yeah, I had it expired auth token. If I go back to my feedback, you'll see on here I can see specifically which routes that these comments were left at. So this gives me a really good overview of all of the different places that I can manage and toggle these and delete pieces of feedback, which is nice. Let's see, that's pretty much it for getting this working on the site. The only other piece that I changed was putting in this social media logo, and what that looks like is I had the feedback component that we've already created in the previous stream, and I just added in an icon here that is whichever provider that the user used to sign up for fast feedback, so Google or GitHub, and we take that string and we remove the .com from the end. So then this uses the SVGs that we have defined before in previous streams to allow us to append that at the end. That's a pretty high level overview of this change. If you have any more questions on specifically this, leave it in the chat. But now we can jump to managing information about the site with an edit and delete. And I specifically wanted to cover that in this stream because people will want customization for how they want to display these pieces of feedback on their site. Some people might want to show these social logos, some people might not, some people might not want to show the timestamps. And then eventually I'd like to get to the point where you can do ratings as well. But I don't think that's gonna make the MVP. So what I want to do, if I can just close out of this for right now, we'll close out, well, we can go back to here. On this page, if I am an admin and I own this site, then I want there to be the ability to edit. And then back on the list of all your sites, if I'm an admin, I want the ability to delete a site. So we've already established this pattern with feedback where there's a delete, like a trash icon. We'll want to do the same thing here. So let's get started on that. Inside of this header, we have the site name, the site ID, and then whichever route, and we use that to render the breadcrumbs. But then we also have this heading, and then we can put some button in here. And this is very similar to all of the sites where we have the ability to add a site, and it shows that button that pops up the modal. So we want to do something really similar here, but it's going to be an edit modal. So let's take something like this. We'll throw it in here. And now it's really, we want to read if there's a user, and we can do that either inside of this function or wherever we call the site header, which is going to be on that embedded route. Since we've already pulled the user here, we can just pass this in as a prop, or we could consume that hook inside of the component as well. Let's just do a prop for now. So we can say is site owner. So we only want to allow them to edit this if they're the site owner. we'll just say that this is true for now and then swing back. If they're the site owner, then we want to display some button that's going to allow them to edit their site. And what could be really fancy too is I know that in Tracker UI, I think there's a gear icon that would look kind of nice. And we can do like a left icon for that. Settings. Yeah, let's do that. So we'll do a left icon of settings for that. First, let's take the add site modal that we defined before. We'll just start from here, and we're going to make a edit site modal. While these are probably somewhat similar, I always like to go on the side of being more explicit before I try to combine them into something that is reusable. So this is going to be our edit site modal. It will probably look pretty similar. And the button that we were going to show, let's throw a left icon. That was settings. Okay, if they're the site owner, show the edit site modal. Go back over to our page. So right now this is hard-coded, so it's just going to say that I'm the site owner. Eventually we will add that logic. And this should pop the existing logic for adding a site, which is not what we want to do. What we want to do is my very crude mockup here, but we want to have the ability to toggle the state of some feedback. So show icons, show timestamp, show ratings. One thing I'm debating with this is we've already established a pattern on the feedback page for using switches to toggle visibility instead of checkboxes. So I'm almost leaning towards, after thinking about this a little bit more, using switches instead. Plus we have already defined that pattern for using React state to control that. So maybe we'll start with switches. So we're going to need 3 switches for all these different pieces. And then if we want to make it really fancy, we can make it automatically update when you change the switch value. And then we can even ditch the update button and it will just automatically update. So let's try to do something like that. I'll go back to my site and we can pull up the switch where we use that in another place in the feedback row. So what we did here is the state of this switch was managed by props that got passed in. So this was a controlled component. Whether it was checked or not depended on the information that we pulled back from the API. That's one way to do it. We can also do it where we control that state locally, and when we change each piece of that state, we're just updating some local state, and then we forward that to Firestore. Really anything will work here. We'll just start with going into here, edit site. We'll say this is feedback. I wonder, it might make more sense to do I wonder if there's a label for a switch, I guess is what I'm thinking, because I'm going to need that on the right side. I guess we'll need to do it like this. already have this. The switch should probably come first. And then we'll say that this first one is going to be show timestamp. Okay. Let's steal that color too. Get rid of that. We're going to need the switch. I don't think we've imported that yet. Okay. That looks decent. Let's put some margin on the left there. Okay. I can deal with that. I like that. Show icons, show timestamp, show ratings. Show icon, show timestamp, show ratings. So previously in the add site modal, we were using React hook form, and it was listening for on submit and handling that. I think we might actually handle this one different because it's already set up to use the toast from Chakra UI. And I'm wondering if it would be a better experience if you click on one of these and it just automatically updated. Because I'm assuming it will probably start out like this, right? And then you click here, and then you would come down to the bottom and say update. We can roll with that. So this will be on edit site. And it used React hook form. It registered those fields so that it could easily pull the values based on the name. I don't know if we'll be able to do that with Chakra's switch component, but it's worth a shot. So I think that would be inside of here. Ratings. So for now, I will just comment all of this out. And we'll see what we're working with. Hopefully, my intention would be that clicking update should pass in some fields here. I guess it's not really props, but I'm going to change it anyway. Pass in a field, and ideally I would see ratings, and it would know what the value is. Nothing happening yet. Button of type submit. On the form, on submit, handle submit. On edit site. Nothing. Do I need a hard refresh? I don't think I would. Must not be getting anything. Oh, interesting. So if you don't actually change this, it's not getting anything. I wonder if it's because we need to set a default value with React hook form first, because it has no context right now of what that is. But we're close. We could probably even abstract this out into a little component. We're doing a little bit of copy pasta work here. Let's do that for now. What's this one? So we have show ratings, show icons. Icons makes more sense. And show timestamp. So now my assumption would be that when I change all three of these, now they will be recognized by React hook form. I see all three of these values coming in as true. So we're getting there to being able to manage these values and then talk to Firestore. Cancel and update still works, but we'll make it so that when update is clicked, it actually talks to the database. The next thing I want to figure out is why they're not initially showing up in React hook form. And I think the best way to do that is to first put in some fake data in here. So I'm going to find a site where the name is equal to my site. Okay. And then on this site model, we're going to be adding a new field that's called settings. And this is going to be a map. So we're going to have, let's see, timestamp, icons, and ratings. We'll default them all to true. Timestamp, icons. Oh no, ratings won't be true because we haven't done that yet. Okay, so now for this site we have settings. So if we go back to here, where we were determining if it's a site owner, we need to be able to pass in these settings. And when we're fetching the static props for this site, we fetch all of the information about the site from Firestore. And we pass it in as an initial prop to the component, which we have here. And we're using that to get the name of the site. So instead, let's just do this. We'll pass in the entire site. This is gonna blow up, but we need to go in here. And instead of site name, we have the entire site. And we can just change this to reference that value, use optional chaining. If it doesn't exist, it falls back to just using a dash. Is that the last one? No, one more. And the other value we need is settings. Actually, I think I'm going to pull this out. Switch this from it just directly returning the component that we want to render, and instead explicitly doing that so that we can pull site name up into a variable here. Oh, not render, return. There we go. And there's my auto formatting. Okay. So now I should be able to see the settings from the database that I just added here inside of this site header component. And I also want to go get rid of those console log statements that are crowding up. Yeah, let's get rid of these. So that worked. We were able to pull the settings back from Firestore. And we see that icons is true, ratings is false, timestamp is true. Perfect. So now I think we want to use those values to set up the form for React Hook form. Oh, maybe. Yeah, we didn't even have this register inside of the edit. Oh, wait. Yes, we did. Okay. I'm not crazy. So let's pass these settings into the edit site modal. So from the site header, we get to the edit site modal. We have the settings. Don't need that for now, don't need that for now. On the switch, my guess is that we would do the, is it default value? No, default is checked. Would be settings at icons. Let me just double check that's the right value. Default is checked, yep. Icons, ratings, and timestamp. Okay, now my assumption would be it should hopefully pull the correct values from Firestore. Awesome. And pre-populate those switches so that they have the right values. Now, when I change something, like let's say I wanted to turn the icons off, and I hit update, I don't see anything. Why do I not see anything? Oh, that was weird. Did I not click it? Let's try that one more time. So I click on edit site. The values are correctly pulled from Firestore. Nothing. So something isn't working. Let's take a look at the DOM here. I see this input of type checkbox. It's correctly getting the ID. It's correctly getting the name. Let's pull up React Hook form. Okay. One thing I don't know if this is throwing it or not off or not, but we're defining a name and an ID. Everything looks good so far. What's interesting to me is that I would think it would still print out something. You know what I mean? Like, it seems like this form should still at least say something when you click on that button. The button is type submit. That looks right. On edit site. I might want to do a comparison with the add edit site modal and see if I'm missing something there. I'll just make sure I see a form in here. I do see the form. Okay, let's pull up the add site modal. It's doing a very similar thing with the form on submit. We have these inputs. The only thing that makes me questionable is having multiple IDs or names. That could potentially be throwing something off. But we really want this ID because that's what's linking it to the label for proper accessibility. I know that there was an example in their recipes here. I wonder if they use switches in here. So form on submit, handle submit. Which is basically exactly what we're doing. Oh, interesting. Form label, HTML for. Looks like you can do either or. And we don't need to do any validation on there. Okay, maybe that was what. Let's try this again. I think I might have just had an idea. I wonder if the default is checked, is overriding React Hook form controlling the value of that input, and then it doesn't think that there's a state change happening, so it's not getting registered correctly. Because I'm guessing we might do like an initial value setup where we do that instead of this default is checked, because I think React Hook form's probably the mastermind behind whether it's checked or not. So if I change this, okay, I saw it come through there, which leads me to believe that it is related. Just gonna make sure I know what the settings are. It's so strange to me that it only happens some of the time. I guess one way we could verify too is if I go into the add site modal. I'll just take this where it's actually creating, well, we'll leave the close. I'll take this where it's actually creating the site. I'll just comment this out and I'll log the name. And my assumption would be that we're seeing this get called every time. And maybe we can find the discrepancy between the two pieces of code. Very strange. Could it be that I had the on close? Other than that, we were basically just destructuring these, which, I mean, we could do. It's timestamp icons and ratings. I've been investigating this saving thing, and it sounds like it might be an issue with one of the VS Code plugins that I have. But for now, it'll do. Let's go back to the individual site. And our settings are getting pulled correctly. We click Edit Site. Turn this on. I see settings. Interesting. That is so strange to me. I wonder if it's possible that React Hook form gets a collision if you're doing multiple forms. Because it only works some of the time. We could also try just doing an input of type checkbox. Take this. We'll comment this out. Now this would be timestamp. And even now, just doing a vanilla checkbox, I'm not seeing what I would expect. Well, I think that for now, I'm gonna skip it, come back, and then maybe I'll have figured it out in my head. Sometimes you gotta step away. So the next thing we would be doing here is assuming that it was correctly populating those values, it will be actually saving it off to the database. So we have the default values. I'll just put these back for now. When we click, type a submit, and it goes into our function, we want to handle this piece. So what this will look like is we're going to take in these new values, the timestamp, the icons, and the ratings, and I'll just drop in these new values. And basically, I guess we could just keep this as fields, because then that's exactly what this new payload would be, the new fields that we want to update. And we're going to go into our Firebase functions. We're going to say update the site with some new fields. We're going to do that. And I don't even think we're going to need to make it synchronous to wait for that to finish. We can just do an optimistic UI and assume that that finishes successfully. So then we'll say success. We've updated your site. Show that for 5 seconds. And then this piece, we have previously fetched the list of sites using SWR, and what this is doing is updating our cache to take that site, and previously it was adding on a new site. Really what we need to do here is find that specific site and update that value. Now, you could do that, or you can just do this, and it will find this key inside of the cache and it will revalidate it. So we did something very similar for, I believe it was on the feedback row. So after we toggled the feedback, instead of doing optimistic UI and having to dive down and find that piece, we just had it refetched from the database. So that's really all that this piece is doing, and we can probably do the exact same thing here. So refetched sites, which is going to have that new information from the database, and in that case, then we should await for this to change so that when we're fetching the new information back from the database, we know that it's been updated, and then close the modal. So that looks pretty good. I'm going to take this and let's dive into our database and actually create that update site function. So that's going to be on the client side in our DB file. We have create site, we'll want to do update site. And it's going to be kind of similar to update feedback. So I'm going to start with that. So given the ID of some site, we're going to pass in some new values, go to the collection for sites, find that specific site, and then pass in only a specific set of values that we want to update. So we might want to use this in another place, so I'm going to keep it as generic as this, which will allow us to make sure that the value we pass in, it actually needs to be settings and then these new values. So I'm going to keep this in here, and we'll log this out, or we'll comment that out for now, since we don't want that to happen. Actually, we'll leave it for now. When we have update site, we need to import it inside of here. If it loads, it does not, but we can just do that. And we also need the site ID, which we can probably just forward down from, let's revert these changes. I can just say don't save. In our site header, we have the site ID. We want to forward that down to, oops. We want to forward that down to the edit site modal. And we go inside of here. We now have access to the site ID as a prop. And we're going to use that so we know specifically which site that we want to update. Update, edit. Very similar terminology. I don't know that it matters too much. Okay. Now, these fields, as I mentioned, it actually needs to be settings and fields. So one way that we could test if this was working is if we went to a different site, there wouldn't be any settings because we hard-coded this inside of here. So the default values should be not checked. And if we save to the database, it should populate those values. So I'll just pick a random one. Okay, I'm going to edit site. They're all unchecked because we haven't went in here. And now clicking on edit site should It's still not liking that button. Something is messed up there. And I can't figure out what it is. Is it the form control, maybe? Is on edit site defined somewhere else in this file? Wasn't sure if there was like a name collision. Handle submit. Use form is being imported. Yeah, the differences between this other file are not that different. Hey Lee, I'm new here. Is this a React 2025 tutorial series? Yes, it is. And we're talking about how we're building this application fast feedback. This is the 12th stream so far, so there's been quite a few. But shoot me a DM if you want, and I can help you get caught up. My last ditch effort here is I'm going to try restarting our dev server and seeing if maybe that's what it is. If it's not, then I might have to do a little more diving on React Hook form. Okay, let's see. I also find it interesting that it focuses on, oh, I think I know what it is. It focuses on that value because we defined it as required. And I think it's saying that it's not checked, so it's not required. I might have to refresh. Oh, that's so funny. Okay, it's always the little things, right? So it was thinking that all of those switches needed to be required. So when they weren't, then it wasn't happy. But you see that now it correctly went into database. I see it logged out the new values. And now my assumption would be that for this specific site, I should see settings. Okay, so that correctly saved to the database. Now we need to get it to save the correct values when I update things. So right now they're all false. If I change this, nice, icons is true. But it doesn't look like it is setting the new settings properly. So if I refresh, what my assumption would be here is that this default is checked is not working. Interesting. Okay, so it is working. The cache just must not be getting updated. So I updated. I see they're both true in the database. I go back inside here and settings, which is getting forwarded in. Those aren't getting the new values. So a good way to test this would be just to go into the site header. We'll see if this is re-rendering after the mutation, because we should see this new site come in. Or I might need to change it from the default is checked to be completely controlled by the values coming in from the database, which is like what we were doing for the feedback. I'm guessing that's probably the change. So show ratings, we'll turn this on. Okay, well, I didn't see that update. And it should have. I saw the new values, but I did not see the site header re-render. I can even go to this API and we'll see. Oh, interesting. I see site header settings in my terminal console, which is coming from the server. So that's actually correct. So I think that leads me back to my first assumption, which is this should be is checked. Let's try that. Fail to check prop without an on change handler. Oh, default checked. Trying to get better about keyboard shortcuts in VS Code. Definitely a novice there. The one I just used right there was Command D to highlight other instances of the same thing to get multi-cursor. And then you can change it like that. Okay. Edit site. Interesting. Oh, is this in the wrong? No, that's in the right file. So they're all true, but default checked. Is that the wrong prop name for the switch? So I was right with is checked, but there's no on change, which is interesting because I'm not using on change because I'm using the form state. So let's ignore that console warning for now. Oh, okay. But now it doesn't change when you toggle that value. So if I go look at the feedback row, for example, this switch, it had is checked, and then it had on change. And on change, it was actually calling the API to manage that. So I don't want to do that because I want to wait so they can do multiple edits and click update. And I think what the root cause here is this component isn't re-rendering even when that value changed. So what I might be able to do is add a key to the element, so it will re-render if that key changes. So they're all on, they're all true. I toggle ratings, I hit update, I see the new values, I go back into here, nothing, right? So I wonder if I add a key, and if this changes, then it will re-render. That's worth a shot. That's it. Okay, so that was the problem. It wasn't re-rendering because we were using default is checked, when in reality we needed to use a key to allow it to recognize when that new value came in and re-render the state. And now that makes a lot of sense. I think that polishes this edit site modal. I believe it has everything we need now. We can basically toggle these values. Oh no. Oh wait. I didn't change that. I'm gonna dive more into that. We'll come back to it. Coming back to it worked last time, then we figured it out. The next thing I want to look at is using those values to determine whether we should or should not show things. And this should be as easy as going to our feedback component. For example, if I look at the feedback here, we should be able to pass in some settings and then use that to determine whether or not we want this icon to show. So if I go to feedback where I'm actually consuming this, for example, on the site page, when I'm showing this feedback, inside of here, we already have the site, which means that we were passing in that site to the site header. We also want to pass in the site settings to feedback. I think maybe settings would just make more sense. Because now inside of here, we should be able to use those settings and say, like for example, the icon. We only want to render this if the settings, let's see, what would we call that? Icons, right? If settings icons is true, then show the icon. I might need optional chaining here because that's, if this is null and it gets passed in here, then that's also going to be null. The other one was the timestamp. So settings dot timestamp, and then we're not doing ratings yet, so we don't need to worry about that. So right now, since none of these exist, they're just not going to show up. So what we want to do is add some probably defaults for some of these sites so that they don't all not show. But if we go into, let's see, was it this site that we were managing? We should now see it correctly read those values. Oh, there's no comments. Nice. So we see it has the timestamp and it has the logo. It looks like I'm missing a key in the feedback page 120, 121 site. Oh, no, I have a key. I think it's because we'll need to change this so that it grabs the ID back from the database. But that is not a problem to solve for today. So you notice that just disappeared. For those people just now tuning in, the reason that happens is because it defaults to not visible. So I can toggle that visibility here if I wanted to. Okay. The other thing that I wanted to touch on before we wrap up this stream is going to be deleting sites. And it should be pretty similar to this flow, which pops up a modal, delete feedback. Are you sure you can't undo this? With the only caveat of when you delete a site, we probably want to also delete all of the feedback related to that site. So I want to get some of the plumbing for that in place. We're going to basically do something very similar with this delete feedback button. So we'll start from there. Delete site button. Delete site button. Okay. And we want to see where we were using that. It was in the table. So let's take that. And we're going to go to our sites table. We have this extra column here that's only 50 pixels wide at the end that we had previously set up. And that is going to be the perfect host for a new piece of table data. That will be the delete site button. Not getting any autocomplete, that's fine. Site ID. Yep, that's at the same level because they're in components. Okay, so now we see trash cans everywhere. Popping these should pop a modal, but we probably want to change some verbiage in here. Delete site. Are you sure you can't undo? We'll say, are you sure this will delete all of the site's feedback as well? I love fast refresh. Like right there, that's just one of those little things that you just gotta love. I also feel like, this is very minor, but I feel like the font weight of this could be a little bit better. Font weight of bold on that delete button. Yeah. Let's also go back to the delete feedback button and give that the same treatment. So there's consistency. Okay, so this modal is looking pretty good. Are you sure this will delete all your site's feedback? I don't really like that sentence. This will also delete all feedback left on the site. That's maybe a little more clear. So we click on that button. This is all fine. Instead of feedback ID, we have a site ID. And really what we want to do is call delete site. This is going to be a new function that we define inside of our library on our client-side Firestore operations. We're going to revalidate API at sites. And in this case, we can do optimistic UI because it's basically the exact same thing. We take the sites that we had previously fetched, we filter down. If the site's ID is not equal to the site ID that we have right now. So filter out just the site that we are removing. So just to give a demo of what this could look like, we will comment this out. So we're not doing anything in the database yet. We'll open this up. We'll comment that out. And what I would expect now is it will look like we deleted the site when really we didn't. So I'll click this. The row gets removed. It's removed from the cache, but it's not actually going to persist to the database. When we refresh, we'll still see that site. So what we want, we have this delete feedback. We're going to want something very similar. Delete site. Go to sites, find this, and delete it. Whoa! And this will work, right? This will delete the site. But what we also want to do is delete all of the feedback for a site. And I hadn't really had an opportunity to do this before, so this will be interesting. But when I was looking into this, I stumbled onto some beautiful Google Stack Overflow things and also GitHub issues. And I found this really interesting, the concept of doing batched writes, which I think is what we want to do here, right? I want to fetch all of the feedback for this site. I want to iterate over those and then do a batch delete of every single one. So it should be something like, I don't know if we have a great example in here. Not really. Okay, that's fine. We'll do, where are we at here? Delete site. We'll say, oh, I know where it's at. We definitely get feedback like this on the admin side. Get feedback where site ID is in site ID. So go to Firestore, the collection of feedback where the site ID is equal to the ID, get. That's the equivalent of here, just the difference being async await and a dot then. It gets back a snapshot. So these would be feedback for each thing in the feedback. We don't really even want to do that. We're going to want to do something like this, which was the equivalent of basically what we were doing here. I think we'll want to do that inside. But can we do it inside of for each? So we need to get a reference to that. So that would be, well, we already have a reference to it, right? It's a document. instead, let's just return this. And we'll do this first. And this needs to be, ooh, oops. I guess it probably doesn't matter, does it? Did I do that wrong? Yeah. So let's try this. We'll see what we're working with here. We'll go to, let's say, this Google site. I want to make sure that it has feedback. So we can see it here in the database. We see that there's one piece of feedback here. So then my assumption, hopefully this works, is that it will, given an ID, find the sites at that ID, delete it. Oh wait, well, yeah, that should be fine. I don't think there's any order that we need to do that in. Then next, get all of the feedback for that site ID, and then we're going to create a batch transaction. For each piece of feedback, we're going to delete it. Okay, so the site's gone. If I refresh here, interesting. I still see Google. Oh, that's because it's commented out. Okay, that makes sense. Let's try that again and actually hit the delete button. There we go, we got an error. Ooh, insufficient permissions. That makes sense. I think that's because, so this is due to my client-side Firebase security rules. I think it is complaining because I'm trying to, I don't know that I've set up explicitly the ability to delete that feedback from the client side. Which makes me wonder if I should put this behind an authenticated API route. If I go into my rules, specifically for sites and feedback, only allow you to delete if you're the owner. And the owner is defined by author ID. So, okay, so the author ID matched for deleting the site, but did it not for, let's see. I don't know that there's a good way for me to query down to what that was. Let's try it with a different site that has a little bit more distinguishable feedback. So we'll say Facebook. The feedback on here is going to be Facebook, so I know what I'm looking at. And go back to sites. So I'm still getting that permissions issue. But now if I go and refresh, Facebook was definitely deleted. Like I wish it was in real life. Weird. Okay, that's really strange because I do see it being both deleted from the site as well as the feedback. So I wonder what that permission issue is about. I did see some stuff when reading through here that was like, hey, you probably shouldn't do this client side unless your security rules are set up right. But mine should be set up right because I am the author of that comment. But that does make me wonder, there will be other people who will leave pieces of feedback and I won't be the author of that. And we'd have to change that to be not only the author of this piece of feedback, but also the site author. And maybe we don't want to do that. In that case, maybe we want to push that to an API route so that when it's in the node context, we have our JOT validation on an API route. For example, API at sites, we check the JOT that we get and we verify that ID token to make sure that we're authenticated to make that call. So I think probably what we want to do is then actually delete a site through an API route. Now there's a couple different ways you could do this, right? You could do a site API route that only accepts a delete method, or you can just do explicitly delete site that takes a post. It doesn't really matter to me. I'm just gonna do a delete site for now. And on this one, we will want to verify the ID token. And this will be delete site, which will pass in we'll pull the site ID as a query parameter off this API call, and then delete a site given that, and this will return, I guess, either success, something like this. It's going to either return success or error if that worked or if it didn't work. So something like this could also work where we're pushing delete site to an API route. The interesting part to me is that this technically works, it just throws that error. So I'm going to do a little more research on that offline, and in the next stream, if that's still the right approach, then we can finish tying off this API route. Otherwise, I'll keep doing it client side and modify those security rules. But I think that covers most of what I wanted to talk about in today's stream. Try to keep these around an hour, just in the interest of everyone's time. If there's any questions, throw them in the chat right now and I'll try to get them answered before we end the stream. When I delete, isn't it async? Let's see. Yes, this should be async. We could await each one of these. I would still think though that, well, returning here, this is going to be, it's awaiting this batch commit right here. So if I threw an await on wherever we call delete site, then it would be async. Unless you were talking about right here, which I didn't make this async because the order of operations here doesn't matter. We can delete this without deleting these and it's fine. Unless we wanted to really make sure that this deletion happened, and we could check that first and then only process with deleting the rest of the feedback. But yeah. All right, well, thank you to everybody who tuned in live. It was a pretty fun stream. We covered a bunch of different things. The embedded feedback page on my site, which will be going live when this course is completed. We talked about catch-all routes. We talked about how to edit and delete sites, and we messed with React Hook Form, messed with the switches from Chakra UI, a bunch of fun stuff. If you have any questions for me, feel free to shoot me an email at me@leerob.io or message me on Twitter. So thank you, everyone. Cheers.